Best HFY stories: why you should never hire human mercenaries. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, many races had come to understand the importance of hiring mercenaries for their conflicts. Some were highly trained, others equipped with advanced technology, but none quite as notorious as the humans. The Galactic Consortium had long relied on humans to handle the most dangerous assignments. With their unparalleled adaptability and brutal efficiency, humans were often the first choice. However, there were whispers, stories of human mercenaries gone rogue, of unexpected outcomes, and of simple, terrifying truths. If you were ever in a position to hire mercenaries, the consensus among the older species was always the same: never hire human mercenaries. The first incident, the Zorga conundrum. The Zorga, a race of highly intelligent, but somewhat pacifistic beings, had a thriving trade empire on the edge of the galaxy. When their system was threatened by a rival faction, they hired a human mercenary unit, convinced that the humans' reputation for decisive action would save them. The mercenaries arrived in sleek, black ships, armed to the teeth, ready for the job. The Zorga gave them the standard contract: minimal collateral damage, a peaceful resolution if possible, and complete neutrality in the conflict. It was clear that they valued diplomacy, and only wished to use force as a last resort. A day into the assignment, the Zorga were summoned to the mercenary base. What they saw stunned them. The humans had completely wiped out the rival faction's fleet. In a single, brilliant strike, they obliterated every warship, leaving only debris and the faintest traces of their enemies. When the Zorga representatives arrived, they found their hired mercenaries standing proudly amidst the wreckage. The humans looked at them with confusion. "We did what you asked. We handled the threat. Why are you upset?" the human leader asked. The Zorga were speechless. The contract had explicitly stated that they preferred a peaceful resolution. But to the humans, peaceful resolution was a mere formality. The enemy was gone, their problem solved. The Zorga were forced to rebuild what had been destroyed, and to reconsider their hiring practices. That was the first sign of why humans were not to be trusted in a diplomatic conflict. The second incident, the Scythian uprising. The Scythians were a proud, highly disciplined race. They had known only unity and order for centuries. But when a small faction of their people began to rebel, they faced an internal war that threatened the very fabric of their society. In desperation, the Scythian High Council called upon human mercenaries, believing that their reputation for quick and effective military intervention would help restore order. They asked for a unit capable of crushing the rebels quickly, but with minimal casualties to civilians. The humans arrived in full force, bringing an army far larger than the Scythians expected. They deployed their forces across every major city, setting up fortifications and surveillance grids. When the fighting began, it was swift. But what the Scythians had not anticipated was the mercenaries' approach to minimal casualties. To the humans, minimal casualties meant that any threat to the established order was to be dealt with immediately. The mercenaries began targeting the rebel leadership. But not just them. Entire neighborhoods, suspected of harboring dissenters, were bombed into oblivion. Anyone with even a faint hint of rebellion was executed on sight. When the Scythian leaders tried to intervene, the human mercenaries refused to comply with orders. They were doing the job, as agreed upon. No questions asked. Order had been restored, but the cost was unbearable. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, and the very foundation of the Scythian society had been shattered. The High Council learned the hard way: never hire human mercenaries for an internal conflict unless you were prepared for them to treat everyone as an enemy. The third incident, the Galactic Federation's test. Perhaps the most famous example of the danger in hiring humans occurred when the Galactic Federation, a union of diverse races, decided to test humanity's strength as mercenaries. The Federation had just come out of a disastrous war and needed to test new defense protocols. They thought it would be a simple exercise: hire a small team of human mercenaries to infiltrate and sabotage a few targets. Nothing major, just a test. The humans agreed to the mission, and everything seemed fine until they arrived at the target facility. They didn't just infiltrate it, they blew the whole place apart, taking down entire sectors of the facility with precision strikes that left nothing but charred remains. When questioned, the human leader gave the Federation representatives a simple answer: the target was a military facility. You didn't say it was just for testing. They hadn't been told it was a mock operation, and in their minds, they had done their job by completely neutralizing the threat. No matter how small or simulated it was, the Federation had to rewrite its protocols to ensure that humans were never hired for anything less than a full-scale conflict. Conclusion: why you should never hire human mercenaries. By now, every major race in the galaxy knew the risks of hiring human mercenaries, while other species were predictable, often bound by honor, laws, or negotiation tactics. Humans operated under a vastly different mindset. They understood war in the most brutal, efficient terms. Victory was the only objective. Whether that victory involved diplomacy, destruction, or sheer terror didn't matter. While their tenacity, skill, and adaptability made them formidable allies, it also made them terrifying adversaries. The moral complexity of their actions could not be predicted, and when they were hired, they often gave no thought to the larger consequences. So, if you find yourself needing mercenaries, whether to settle a political dispute, quell a rebellion, or defend your empire, remember the stories of the Zorga, the Scythians, and the Galactic Federation. You may get the job done, but the cost may be higher than you ever expected, and in the end, you'll understand why the galaxy has decided, never hire human mercenaries. The fourth incident, the Tarkani expedition. The Tarkani, a race of explorers and colonists, had long been admired for their peaceful expansion into the far reaches of the galaxy. They sought only knowledge, tranquility, and the harmonious integration of different species into their colonies. When a strange and hostile alien force began encroaching upon their newest colony, the Tarkani had no choice but to seek mercenaries for protection. They chose a human mercenary unit, renowned for its unparalleled tactical skills and efficiency. The Tarkani made it clear that they only wanted to defend their borders, avoid any large-scale conflict, and keep the collateral damage to a minimum. They also asked for a rapid response, as the alien invaders were already on their doorstep. The humans arrived in full force, but it didn't take long before things went awry. The Tarkani had expected the humans to play a more defensive role, pushing the invaders back with precision strikes. But the mercenaries, as was their way, went on the offensive, launching a brutal counterattack on the alien invaders, then continuing their assault into their home territory. For 3 days, the human mercenaries ravaged the alien invaders' world, wiping out everything in their path. Their approach was cold, efficient, and merciless. They didn't just defend the Tarkani, it became a campaign of annihilation. The Tarkani, horrified by the destruction, ordered the human forces to stand down, but they were met with resistance. "We're eliminating the threat," said the human commander, with a chilling indifference in his voice. "They were coming for you. We're making sure they never do again." The Tarkani were left in a difficult position. The invaders were utterly crushed, but the very fabric of their peaceful colony had been shattered by the humans' relentless onslaught. After all, they had only wanted to defend themselves, not wage war. They had thought humans would respect the sanctity of life and their wishes, but they were wrong. They learned, the hard way, that to humans, a threat was a threat, and that meant eliminating it without hesitation. The fifth incident, the wrath of the Krith. The Krith were a highly advanced and ancient species, their civilization having existed for millennia. With an unmatched understanding of technology and warfare, they had never been defeated in battle, and their leaders prided themselves on their strategic genius. But when a catastrophic, galaxy-wide energy anomaly began to threaten their homeworld, they were stumped. The anomaly's sheer unpredictability and destructive force was beyond their comprehension, and they required outside help to avert their destruction. With little choice, the Krith turned to human mercenaries. The Krith Council issued a simple request: "We need a team to retrieve data from the anomaly and halt its expansion. Minimal damage, no destruction, and a quick operation." The humans, always eager to prove their skills, accepted the task without hesitation. But when the mercenaries arrived, they took one look at the anomaly and their first orders were clear: contain it at all costs. Rather than analyzing or studying the anomaly as requested, the humans immediately launched a full-scale offensive against it. Their tactic? Use the anomaly's energy to their advantage, triggering a chain reaction that would send a massive surge of power to the Krith's greatest weapon systems. The Krith, helpless to stop it, watched as their most powerful weapon turned against them. The anomaly was destroyed, but in the process, it devastated Krith infrastructure and tech, causing massive damage that they could not repair for centuries. The Krith were furious. "We said minimal damage," the Krith leaders roared, but the human commander, unfazed, simply shrugged. "It was contained," he said, his voice dry. "Mission accomplished." The Krith, long accustomed to controlling their fate, were left stunned by the complete disregard for their wishes. They learned, just as every other race had learned before, that humans didn't measure success by the means, only by the end result. The final lesson, the Galactic Council's decision. By this point, the collective knowledge of the galaxy about human mercenaries had become legendary. The Tarkani, Zorga, Scythians, Krith, and countless other species had learned the same lesson. Repeated again and again in disaster after disaster, humans were not to be hired for anything short of full-scale war. Their unique, no-compromise approach to conflict was both their strength and their greatest weakness. At a special session of the Galactic Council, the debate over whether humans should ever again be allowed to offer their services as mercenaries reached a boiling point. Representatives from various species were in an uproar, discussing the countless incidents and atrocities caused by human mercenaries. Some argued that humans were simply too unpredictable, too dangerous to work with. But others, those who had hired humans and seen the results, couldn't deny the results. They were effective, efficient, and when it came to getting a job done, few could match the sheer force of human determination. In the end, the Galactic Council made a unanimous decision. Humans were barred from being hired as mercenaries unless a race had explicitly agreed to the brutal, uncompromising approach they offered. No more peaceful solutions, no more diplomatic missions. If you hired a human, you better be ready for war. It was a hard truth, but one the galaxy had learned time and again: never hire human mercenaries, not unless you were prepared for the consequences. The sixth incident, the Dominion of Zalax. The Zalax were a race of telepathic beings who had developed a remarkable sense of unity, governing their society through collective thought. They were renowned throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature and diplomatic prowess, resolving conflicts with wisdom and understanding. However, when a rogue faction of their own kind began to stir up rebellion, they found themselves at a loss. The rebels, a fringe group that rejected the Zalax way of life, had begun a campaign to destabilize the entire Dominion. The Zalax needed help, but their philosophy made them hesitant to involve violence. They turned to human mercenaries, hoping their effectiveness in battle would be tempered by the human understanding of tactical restraint. The contract was simple: infiltrate the rebel forces, capture their leadership, and put an end to their activities without destroying the infrastructure or threatening the well-being of the civilians. The Zalax trusted that humans would follow these guidelines, as they had heard many stories of human warriors using clever tactics to neutralize enemies with minimal harm. The mercenaries, led by a notorious figure known only as Captain Grimm, arrived with precision. Just as promised, the Zalax were initially reassured by their professional demeanor. However, what happened next sent shockwaves through the Dominion. Captain Grimm's team didn't just infiltrate the rebels, they wiped out entire cities under the guise of capturing rebel leaders. In one swift, brutal attack, they decimated the civilian population they had been hired to protect. The rebel leadership? They were executed without hesitation. The rebels were no longer a threat, but the Zalax were left in ruins. When the Zalax leaders arrived at the mercenary base to confront Captain Grimm, they found him lounging in his command chair, calm and unbothered by the devastation. "We got the job done," he said, leaning back in his seat. "Rebels neutralized. Mission complete. Your problem is solved." The Zalax were speechless. The concept of collateral damage, of the destruction of innocents, was foreign to them. They had trusted that the humans would respect their wishes, but the mercenaries, as usual, saw things only through the lens of military efficiency. To them, civilians were simply obstacles in the way of victory. The idea of saving the infrastructure, of preserving the sanctity of life for its own sake, was irrelevant. From that day on, the Zalax placed a galaxy-wide ban on hiring human mercenaries, spreading the lesson far and wide: human mercenaries would never be bound by moral constraints, only by the necessity of completing the mission. The seventh incident, The Scorvins' War Games. The Scorvins, a race of warlike gladiators, had long used combat as a form of ritual, displaying their strength and honor in controlled tournaments and battle simulations. To them, warfare was a sport, an elegant display of power and skill. They were notorious for their strict codes of conduct, and when they decided to test out new tactics and strategies, they invited mercenaries from across the galaxy to participate in controlled war games. Human mercenaries had, once again, made a name for themselves as effective and ruthless fighters, and the Scorvins believed that human mercenaries would add an interesting twist to their games. The contract was clear: participate in simulated battle scenarios, follow the rules, and engage in the competition for the honor of the Scorvin people. But when the human mercenaries arrived, they did not play by the Scorvin rules. Instead of engaging in the simulations, they immediately launched a surprise attack on the Scorvin outpost, decimating their defenses and taking control of their battlefield command center. The Scorvins were furious. "This is a game," they shouted. "You were hired to participate in our rituals, not to start a real war." But the humans, unfazed by the Scorvins' outrage, shrugged and began fortifying their new position. "War is war," said the human commander, his voice cold. "There are no rules when the stakes are life or death." The Scorvins, normally so powerful in battle, were caught off guard. They had expected a fair fight, one in which the strongest would win, but the humans turned it into a real conflict, causing chaos across the simulated war zone. Within hours, what had begun as a training exercise had turned into an actual skirmish. The Scorvins, humiliated and defeated, were forced to call off the games before their entire base was taken over. The Scorvins' Council issued a stern warning to the galaxy: never let human mercenaries join your games or simulations. They are incapable of distinguishing between play and true warfare. The eighth incident, the Andalian Crisis. The Andalians were a peaceful, highly spiritual race, devoted to a life of meditation and enlightenment. Their society had never known war, and they prided themselves on their ability to resolve disputes through peaceful dialogue. However, their utopian way of life was suddenly threatened when a rogue faction of war-hungry raiders began attacking their remote colonies. Desperate, the Andalians sought assistance from the human mercenaries, requesting a defensive force that would drive the raiders away without spilling blood. They were willing to pay handsomely for the mercenaries' protection, but their condition was clear: the mercenaries must ensure that no civilians were harmed, and no violence should be used unless absolutely necessary. The mercenaries accepted the job with their usual professionalism, but when they arrived on Analia, they assessed the situation, and the commander made a chilling decision: we end this now. Without warning, the humans launched a full-scale offensive against the raiders. They didn't merely push them back, they eradicated them entirely, razing entire villages to the ground in the process. The Andalians, horrified, watched as their beautiful homes were destroyed in the name of defense. "We told you, no violence unless necessary," the Andalians pleaded with the mercenaries. But the humans only shrugged. They were a threat. You wanted them gone. It was another brutal lesson learned: humans didn't just defeat their enemies, they annihilated them. To humans, the concept of restraint was alien. They measured success not by preservation, but by the total destruction of the threat, no matter the cost. Conclusion: the final verdict. Across the galaxy, the reputation of human mercenaries had become legendary, but not in the way most had hoped. They were efficient, yes, relentless, without question, but when it came to nuance, diplomacy, and mercy, they were as unpredictable and dangerous as a star about to collapse. The Galactic Federation had long warned against hiring human mercenaries, but the lessons continued to unfold. From the Zalax's ruined diplomacy to the Scorvins' lost honor, the story was the same: never hire human mercenaries. And yet, despite the warnings, the human services were still sought after by those willing to risk everything for victory. For in the end, there were always those who believed that the cost of victory was always worth paying, even if it meant the galaxy itself would never be the same.